with demand expected to come back, the question remains, does this mean the economy is back on track?
Companies now, after experimenting with offshore in places like India, Philippines, and Poland, want to bring those jobs back.
We invest in the U.S. We're the biggest exporter in the country. In the cycle we're in right now, we're creating jobs.
From Radio America, it's Neil Asbury's Made in America, the show that explores American industry, large and small, and promotes American-made products everywhere. Put Neil Asbury's Made in America to work for you.
A very big welcome to you today. I'm your host, Neil Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Ruffman. Hey, Rich, Sunday early afternoon, I was kind of hanging out down at my place in the Florida Keys. Beautiful, beautiful day down there, by the way, just absolutely gorgeous. And I said, okay, man, I'm going to check in with Newsmax, just kind of see what the world is doing. And there it was, President Trump saying that the tariffs are going to be increased on Chinese products, or at least a big chunk of them, from 10% to 25%. Is going to be done on Friday, and that he's very, very upset because they have reneged on some commitments that they had made. Now, the Chinese have kind of shot back and said that's not true. We always honor our commitments, and right now we are in a standoff. And it's hard to understand really what's going on behind the scenes. What do you think about that?
Well, I think I almost choked. Gosh,
yeah, I mean, we were going to an agreement. It was already a done deal.
They would never renege. Obviously, we don't know something that happened. I mean, do we presume that we know everything that the Secretary of State or Lighthouser knows, that the trade rep knows, or the president knows? I tend to doubt that. Obviously, something went wrong, and they're upset. And I tend to think that the Chinese totally misjudged, where this president was at and where this country's at, and they could have misjudged it on a number of levels. One, in terms of economics, not realizing how strong our economy is, and number two, not realizing the resilience and the strength of this president, given the fact that he's under attack, and maybe they thought that he's going to be taken out, which is. In terms of impeachment or not winning 2020, so they want to ride the clock. I mean, there are a lot of loose, little catalysts running around in the ozone right now. And so I tend to think that's one of those hit, and that's the way it goes. I'm anxious to hear what our first guest has to say.
Yeah, well, let's bring him on right now. Dan Eberhart. He's the Chief Executive Officer of Canary. Dan has built Canary into one of the largest privately held oil field service companies in the U.S. By the way, both energy and trade are two of our favorite topics here. So Dan is involved in both. And on April 25th, and boy, what a difference a couple of weeks makes. What a difference one tweet makes, for that matter. Dan published a piece in the Washington Examiner, and it was titled, "What Does a U.S.-China Trade Deal Look Like?" Well, it looks a lot different today than it did just a couple of weeks ago. Dan, welcome to Made in America.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I would say I would maybe take that title and exchange trade deal for trade war and keep the same title if I wrote a piece today.
Really, but President Trump has just said earlier that President Xi of China has sent him a very beautiful letter. So you never know what's going on here. But Dan, here it is. I mean, you're in the energy business. One of the big benefactors of a trade deal with China will be energy exports. It looks like, to get this pesky trade deficit down, one of the ways to go forward was China needs a lot of energy. They're not blessed with energy resources. We have a lot. We're now becoming an exporter of energy, all sorts of energy, and China needs that, and this would be a great way to do some business and bring that trade deficit down. So how important is a trade deal to your industry?
So I have a couple of different aspects. I'll say that China is building 2 refineries this year that each of those 2 refineries need, or they're building others, but 2 refineries that need 400,000 barrels a day of oil each. So there's a voracious appetite for oil imports in China, and the U.S. exports of oil, about 20% of those go to China. So China is an increasingly valuable export market for us, and frankly, they need it. I also think, to kind of comment on your opening, I think that there's also U.S. arms sales to Taiwan, the U.S. North Korea developing situation, as well as the U.S. sanctions on Iranian oil sales to China. One or all of those three variables may also be playing out behind the scenes as far as how they're interpreting the trade deal. But at Canary, we manufacture in the U.S. and China both, depending on what widget and for what purpose and what time it's needed in. And this trade war has affected us because we've got to either eat the price increases or pass them on to consumers, and or examine what we make overseas and what we make in America to try to come up with what's the best formula for Canary's success in the future.
Well, now, having said that, but let me ask you this, and when you look at the landscape that's out there, I agree with what you're saying in just about everything you said. But at what point do we decide that we must take a stand on certain things, given the fact that we have probably negotiated a deal, or parentheses S deals, and something went wrong? And at what point do we agree with our president and say, all right, I think we have to do something about this? So how do you stand with that? I mean, at what point do we acquiesce, or we just, change it? What do you think?
Look, I'm a supporter of Trump, and I think he's diagnosed the problem absolutely correctly. I think there may be a short-term hit to the economy to get this done, but I was in a meeting with the vice chairman of the NPCC, sort of like the Senate over in China, in October, and they were, very wagging their finger, thinking, we're not going to back down a trade war, and we're prepared for this to last 25 years and all this stuff. But I think thou dost protest too much. I think this is hurting their economy more than ours. Our economy is strong, and we're in a position that Trump has said, we can take a short-term hit to our economy a little bit because our economy is so strong, to try to get China to stop cheating, stop violating, WTO rules, and to enforce, what they've already agreed to do on international trade deals, and to stop stealing IP.
So, Dan, here's where, I might differ a little bit. I mean, look at what's happening to our farmers. I mean, our farmers are absolutely getting crushed. Grain prices, the lowest they've been in 42 years, and all farm prices. It's pork. I mean, it's just right across the board. Our farmers are taking it right on the chin. And I'll tell you who else is taking it on the chin. It's not, and President Trump is wrong. He's absolutely wrong. It is not China who's paying these tariffs. It is American companies who import products, whether it's for their supply chain for manufacturing products in the United States. Like you said, you bring in a lot of things from China to put into your own manufactured products. I do, too. I'm an American manufacturer. I'm very proud of it. But we live off of a global supply chain that's been developed for years and honed in for years. And you just don't change that at a whim. You don't change it at a whim. More than half of what we import from China are materials and components for our own factories. So we're penalizing our factories. It is Americans who are paying these tariffs. And then obviously you pass them on to your customers.
I agree with you that it's American companies and American consumers that are paying the tariffs. I absolutely agree with you. I think that this is more of a look at this through a prism of chess, in that to get China to stop cheating on WTO rules, to stop dumping steel, and to respect IP, we've got to have this standoff to get through the other side. So this is like the short-term pain, short-term medicine to get to being healthy on the back end. That's the prism that I'm looking at this through, and thinking that the last two presidents just didn't have the stomach for the fight.
I agree with exactly what Dan is saying, Neal. I agree with what Dan is saying.
Right.
I agree with that.
And this is what campaign promises look like, right? I mean, our country has had, a number of candidates who've promised to get tough with China, and they don't do it. And the other thing, Rich, that's happening is that the Democrats are not fighting the president on this. In fact, Schumer says, hang tough, hang tough, hang tough. You got to hang tough with China. And no matter what the president does, Schumer's going to come back and say, well, you're not tough enough. You're not tough enough. You caved in. You caved in. Well, how about Obama? He didn't even try. He got nothing. He got nada, nothing. It was business as usual, right? And I'm sure there was a financial aspect to that.
That's exactly my point. I think that the way to look at Trump is not as a Republican versus the Democrats. It's disruptor versus DC establishment.
Exactly. Hey, Dan, do you have a moment to come back? I mean, I'd like to ask you some questions about the Chinese energy market itself.
Sure. Sure. I can.
Okay, very good. Hey, look, we got Dan Eberhart from Canary, a very large, one of the largest privately held oil field service companies in the country. He's going to be back with us in a second. You don't want to miss it.
Made in America.
Welcome to Made in America. I'm your host, Neal Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Rothman. And we're very pleased to have with us Dan Eberhart. He's the Chief Executive Officer at Canary. Dan has built Canary into one of our largest privately held oil field service companies, a very, very important industry. And, of course, energy, very, very important to our economy. One of the real bright spots, in fact, it was quite contradictory, whereas President Obama was always beating up on our energy industry, and it was one of the only industries that kept our economy afloat and tanking under Obama, or it would have looked so much worse. But Dan, let me ask you this question. China, what is the state of the energy industry in China? I know that they burn a lot of coal. They're building refineries. They don't have energy resources. What does China have domestically, and how big of a worry is that to China to be able to compete in the future?
Well, it's a lot different than what we've got there. What they've got there is a huge electric car business. Electric car adoption in the U.S. is just under 2%. It's at about 10% in China. But here's the big caveat: they call them coal cars. 70-80% of their electricity generation comes from coal, not nuclear, not cleaner burning natural gas, and so it's only slightly better for the environment. And there's really a negative impact on the environment with these electric cars that are based on coal. So they've got an electric car, a very big electric car business in industry, but it's really powered by coal. Secondly, they're building a huge refinery industrial complex. I'm talking tens of $billions a year, something like 80% of the additional refining capacity in the world every year. 80% of that increase is happening in China. So they're really trying to build out both ends of the spectrum and be green in Beijing and Shanghai and Hong Kong, but then in the Tier 2 and Tier 3 cities, really looking for industrial combustion engines at $10,000 cars to sell to their kind of lower middle class that's upcoming. So they're really scrambling to build all the above, but they have a very, very, very big need for energy in the future.
Which has been great for us, Neal, in the sense that, energy has transformed, has become a political leverage for this administration and for this country, whether we're doing it in terms of dealing with China, or we're doing it in Eastern Europe, or in Western Europe, rather. The ability for us to leverage what Russia's doing and replace natural gas from Russia or energy sales from Russia into parts of Europe, that's a dramatic step for us, don't you think? And this is great for Dan.
Yeah, I agree exactly with that. Without U.S. shale and what's happening in the middle of this country in the oil fields, there is no way we could be as assertive against Iran. Obama couldn't have been aggressive against Iran without the U.S. shale. We couldn't be assertive in Venezuela. We couldn't be assertive against China.
And Dan, what do you think is going to be the outcome of what's happening with Iran right now? I mean, will the president be able to shut down their oil exports? I mean, how much can he cut into that?
Oh, I think he can cut into it dramatically. China is the only country that hasn't said they're going to obey the U.S. sanction waivers, and Europe tried to do an end run around us by coming up with this swapping goods for cash something. I don't know all the details, but it flat didn't work. They tried to avoid the dollar, and it flat didn't work. Iran is at the mercy of the U.S. The only one that said that they're going to openly violate the sanctions is China. So India, South Korea, Japan, the other three big customers of Iran have all said we're done, and I think it's going to really, really crimp their ability to get $60 billion a year cash from selling this 1 million barrels a day, which Iranian exports are about 80% of the oil we produce in the Bakken in North Dakota. Just to put it in perspective, are going to be completely shut down.
And I read the other day, and it's kind of amazing. And Rich has had a lot of experience going back and forth to Cuba, but the whole idea of putting an embargo on Cuba to shut down the Venezuelan oil industry and their money source. I mean, what's going on there between Venezuela and Cuba, and why would that kind of be the last chip for Maduro?
Well, I would support that, and again, I'm not an expert in this kind of stuff, but I read that Venezuela has both troops and advisors from Cuba and Russia that have been landing in there. So Cuba's traditionally sent doctors to Venezuela. Venezuela sent oil to Cuba. And now Cuba is sending military advisors. Again, not my area of expertise, but their ability to get hard cash in Venezuela is by selling oil. And
selling oil specifically to Cuba and using them as the middleman.
Yeah, because the U.S. has blocked most of their other customers, so they need to go through Cuba. So I think it could be an ingenious way. Look, I mean, we want regime change that doesn't happen by war or violence, right? That's what we're trying to achieve here. I think the stick is to cut them off from their money source, so he can't pay the military to be basically his giant personal guards.
In short, Neal, energy is the key.
That's right. And we are blessed with an abundance in this country. Let's use it for the good of the world. That's what we're talking about here with Dan Eberhart from Canary. He is the chief executive officer, and they're a very large oil field service company working around the world doing great things. Dan, thanks for coming on the show.
Hey, thank you for having me, Neal.
Coming up, man, we got a great topic here. Rich, I know it's near and dear to your heart. Unions, and boy, are they looking at a lawsuit. And this could be massive. It could really change the whole dynamic with American unions that have a stranglehold. Well, they used to, not so much anymore, over the American economy. Coming up, Jeffrey Schwab, senior attorney at Liberty Justice Center. You don't want to miss it.
Made in America.
Sharply higher at the open, stocks continued to perform well over the course of the day Tuesday.
And I think that bodes well here over the next couple of years for having bigger demands coming to this country.
Now, more of Neal Asbury's Made in America.
Welcome to Made in America. I'm your host, Neal Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Rothman. So, Rich, we just talked about a few of our favorite topics. We talked about trade. We talked about China. We talked about energy. And we got to put unions and are covering unions and, all the right to work stuff that we've talked about over the years. The Janus decision at the Supreme Court, major deal, very big. It almost happened in California. And then Justice Scalia passed away. And in a 4-4 vote, it could not happen. It was brought back by Mark Janus in Illinois. And he said, hey, look, I work for the state. I'm a public employee. I should not be forced to pay dues that are politically motivated. Very important. So you have public employees being forced to pay dues, and those dues going back to, the Democrat Party in promoting positions that, socially or politically that are against those paying the money. Just doesn't seem to be right that you should be forced to pay money for something that you disagree with. You should have a choice. Our country is about choices. Now it's come back that Mark Janus and the Liberty Justice Center, who worked together with him to win the first time around is saying to the unions, well, we want a refund. We want a refund of dues that we paid, and we want to go back as far as we can. According to the statute of limitations in Illinois, that's 2 years. But around the country, that statute of limitations could be much, much longer. I mean, the unions here could be hit with millions and millions and millions of dollars that they're going to have to pay back to people that didn't want them in the first place. Wow, this is massive. Coming on now from Liberty Justice Center is Jeffrey Schwab, who's a senior attorney and involved with Mark Janis in this lawsuit. Jeffrey, welcome to Made in America.
Thanks for having me on, guys.
So, I mean, the first time around, this decision was quite earth-shattering. I know that a lot of the unions around the country just didn't take it laying down, and a lot of the union states, kept on trying to fight it and delay it and come up with ways to water it down. And I don't know how successful they've been. I'd like to get your opinion on that. But now, here comes a lawsuit that says, I want to be paid retroactively all of that money that you stole from me. You took from me without my agreeing to it and used it for purposes that were against my beliefs. So, Jeffrey, how big is this?
Well, it's very important for the people whose money was taken. These are people that before the Janus decision did not want to join the union, but despite not joining the union, were forced to pay agency fees to the unions that they weren't members of. So it's basic fairness that after the Supreme Court said that practice was illegal, that these people be compensated for the damages.
Well, I think, Neal, this is a very, very significant scenario to be talking about. We thought it was, last year when the ruling was going to come down. It is I think, a very big threat to the unions. I just find the demise of Scalia to be awfully convenient, to be perfectly honest. So, and that's another conversation for another time. But I think it was so detrimental to the union that I think he was at risk, by the way. But having said that, put that aside for the time being, this is a very big deal. And I think this next step, and as we were talking about, and I read in the article earlier, that the team's back together, the band's back together, so to speak. And now they're going to figure out, that money should go back to those who had that money put to the unions. And I think I think that should be addressed. Does that money come back? Why didn't the unions escrow those funds?
Jeffrey, is there a precedent here that favors one side or the other?
Well, in general, when you are damaged, you are entitled to the compensation, and the Supreme Court has said for a long time that its decisions on constitutional issues are decided retroactively. So on that basis, it seems like agency fee payers should be entitled to the agency fees that they had to pay, at least back to the statute of limitations. But what the unions are saying is they're saying, hey, wait a second, Abood, which was the decision that Janus overruled, was the law at the time of the decision. So, we had a good faith reliance on that decision, and so we shouldn't have to give back the money that we relied on. The problem with that is, first, that the good faith defense is not found in federal law, where federal law allows one to be compensated for the damages that they suffered for constitutional violations. And two, it's not entirely clear that the unions actually had a good faith reliance on Abood. First of all, the Supreme Court had said since at least 2012 that Abood was on shaky ground, and so and of course the unions knew with the Harris case in 2014 and Friedrichs coming a couple of years later before Scalia died that Abood really was on shaky ground. So whether or not they had a good faith reliance was definitely questionable. And also in other cases, which are not First Amendment cases where good faith defense has been used, those cases, by the way, are almost exclusively, or they are exclusively in cases where bad faith is an actual element of the underlying claim. But in those cases, even when they might have had a good faith belief to take money or property at the time, after the court ruled against them, they certainly don't have a good faith belief that they could keep the money after the Supreme Court ruled against them. So that's the argument that we've put forth.
Hey, Jeffrey, can you stay with this? We're going to take a quick break and come back to this.
Yeah, definitely.
Very good. We're listening and talking with Jeffrey Schwab, a senior attorney at Liberty Justice Center, talking about unions and the big hit that they might be in for. Hey, this is very, very important to your jobs. Stay with us. We're going to be right back.
Made in America.
Welcome to Made in America. I'm your host, Neal Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Rothman, and we're talking with Jeffrey Schwab, senior attorney at Liberty Justice Center. So, Jeffrey, this looks like another 5-4 decision. I mean, it does look like a 5-4 decision if it gets to the Supreme Court. So what is the process now? I guess it's been filed in Illinois and is going to start out there, and, will it be expedited to the Supreme Court?
No, it won't be expedited, but actually, Mark Janus, his case is actually still pending in the court because he is also trying to get the dues that he paid. And so we went back down to the trial court earlier, after the Janus case late last year, and we asked the trial court to rule in our favor and give Mark his dues back. And the trial court said no. He thought that the unions had a good faith effort. So we've appealed that case to the Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals. That's the appellate court that covers Illinois, Indiana, and Wisconsin. And we have filed our brief in that case. So we expect that case in the Seventh Circuit will be decided before this case, Leach, which is our class action lawsuit in Illinois. And so Leach will generally follow the Janus case. And it's possible that this issue could be back up in the Supreme Court if the Seventh Circuit or other courts where there are similar cases across the country are split on what the proper outcome of this is. And so it is very possible that this could be back in the Supreme Court.
Well, that's going to make for good radio, Neal. Looking
this
forward
is
to that. That's for
right.
sure.
I mean, Rich, you can imagine about how many millions of dollars that would be going back to the Democrat Party, if not going back to its members. So,
well, that was the point. Exactly correct. I mean, imagine the threat, just a few years ago when this was being played in the courts to the union that they're going to say, wait a minute, this is a really bad precedent because look at the amount of millions of dollars that we're going to lose here. And now they're back again, and they're saying, well, wait a minute. Now that we won that, check, please. Can we have our money back? And
Jeffrey, how much
amazing.
money is Jeffrey? Is there any idea how big of a liability this is?
Well, it's going to depend on a bunch of different things. One is really every union has a different agency fee, so how big the agency fee is, and then also how many agency fee payers there are. So in our case in Illinois, there's about 2,700 agency fee payers that work for the state of Illinois. So that's the prospective class size, and then the agency fee averages between something like $500 and $750 a year. So if you can do the quick math on that, it's somewhere close to about $2 million
for that one union.
For that one, that's the AFSCME, the state of Illinois AFSCME union, and so just for that union and just for Illinois, yeah.
Well, so Jeffrey, when this whole thing came out, Janus came, a lot of the talk in the more liberal states, the blue states, was, hey, look, we're going to find ways to undermine this. We're going to fight it. We're going to go out there and create conditions that you can only, elect not to have your dues taken out, once a year. And, we're going to try to hide it from everybody when you can do that. And, there was a lot of bad faith efforts to try to suppress this decision. How successful have they been?
Well, they have been successful in the sense that they have passed laws in states like California and Washington and New York, but there also have been about 50 lawsuits filed challenging some of these kinds of things, and they continue. And we're really only at the beginning stages of those lawsuits, so it's really hard to tell until some of the appellate courts and possibly even the Supreme Court weigh in on some of these efforts to see whether they hold water after Janus.
Interesting. Very, very fascinating. Let me ask you, on the union front, something that Rich and I have talked about a lot has been right to work and right to work states. And what was the last state? Was it Kentucky? I can't recall. That was the last right to work state. What's going on with that right now? And are there other states that are considering right to work?
Well, I don't know any that are considering statewide right to work, but the Liberty Justice Center had a case recently where we were defending a local village, the village of Lincolnshire in Illinois, and what Lincolnshire did was they passed a right to work law for their village, and the union sued them and said that that was not allowed under federal law, and unfortunately we lost in both the trial court and the Seventh Circuit, and we appealed to the Supreme Court. And after we appealed, the new incoming governor and the democratically controlled state legislature passed a law that made right-to-work zones illegal in Illinois, and that essentially will end our case before the Supreme Court. So unfortunately, it's not allowed in Illinois, and I believe New Mexico had done the same thing with their incoming Democratic governor after several counties had passed local right-to-work laws. But there may be some opportunity in other states that don't have right-to-work laws but have less democratically controlled legislatures for right-to-work. And so it's possible that we'll see local right-to-work as an issue in some of those states.
Wow, fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. Jeffrey Schwab, a senior attorney at Liberty Justice Center, at the front end, at the cutting edge of the fight to protect your jobs. And it's not unions who protect your jobs. It really isn't. They're the jobs. They're the ones who steal your jobs and take your money. That's true. And Jeffrey's out there working hard for you every day, as well as Liberty Justice Center. Jeffrey, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having me, guys.
It's hard to believe, but the next segment is our last segment. You don't want to miss this. A lot of things still to talk about. We'll be right back.
Made in America.
Welcome to Made in America. I'm your host, Neal Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Ruffman. Hey, Rich, you're going to like this. I was contacted today by an investment banker, very well-known investment banker in the United States, and inquiring if I was interested to acquire a company that made robots for commercial kitchens. How do you like that? We talk about that all the time.
So cool.
Yeah. So very, very fascinating to see what's going on with that. But let's move on for another thing here. What's happening at Boeing? And look, there seems to be an email trail that they knew there was something wrong with their airplanes, and they kind of buried it. I mean, why would they do that? I mean, you can't do that. I mean, people's lives are at stake, and when people start emailing and all of that, and the catastrophe happens. These forensic accountants are able to go into your system and pull out all kinds of data. I mean, you just don't do that. If you got a problem, you got to fess up. You got to go to the federal government. You got to tell them what it is and what you're going to do about it. You're going to work with them, and you're going to make it right. You don't hide it. I mean, why such an iconic company, Boeing, didn't address this in the right way. I mean, it's going to really destroy their reputation for a number of years. It's going to be hard to recover from this.
Well, I think it's scary in the sense that Boeing is a quintessential company in the United States for technology and manufacturing. I mean, they, bar none, they have to be in the top 2 or 3.
They're an emblem of our country.
Sorry?
An emblem. They're an emblem of our country.
There's no question.
Right?
No question. And we always looked up to Boeing for a great run company. You know, Mullally who went to Ford came from Boeing. You know, really smart leadership. The products that are the best in the world in terms of avionics and so forth. And then to find out that, number one, it appears that they tried to get another generation out of the 737. And that may not, in retrospect, been the smartest idea to do that. At the same time, you're right. There was a software problem that was a threat, obviously a direct threat to the avionics of the plane, and to think that would get by because whatever, fill in the blank, is a very scary thought, because you're dealing when you deal in an aviation company. This isn't just a drone. This isn't just something that's going to, making a pizza and that's the way it goes. This is a plane flying at 41,000 feet, could have 300, 400, 500 people in it, and you can't second guess that. You can't not look at the problem. So, yeah, I think this is a very, very, very difficult problem for Boeing to overcome.
Another iconic American company, Amazon. Its founder and leader, Jeff Bezos, has said this week that he wants to put a permanent colony on the moon.
Yep.
I mean, that's fascinating. I mean, that's great.
And they're going to get one-day delivery. He's working on that.
Yeah, I mean, it is very fascinating, though, to, as a concept. Now, you also hear, Elon Musk doing the same thing with Mars, and we got to go and colonize Mars. But it's wonderful to see, though, the American entrepreneurial community. I mean, people who have been so successful, taking their wisdom and their money and taking the risk. And, doing these really incredible things. But, I mean, where is NASA in all of this? Isn't it supposed to be, like the government and, NASA and, this great agency? But it's being taken over by the American entrepreneurial community. Wow.
But maybe, maybe that's that's the natural, organic way that this is going to go. That the private sector is going to step up and provide. Listen, the Falcon Heavy Lift is a Musk product, isn't it? And that's what's going to take us back. It's more powerful than the Saturn V, which was the most powerful rocket in the world, getting us to the moon with the Apollo shot. I mean, that was an amazing, amazing rocket. And now we're, I have to say we waited, 25 years too long to do this. And yes, Mars is, it is center stage for where these, wealthy cats want to take us. And I think that's part of the American spirit. It's sort of like, go west, young man. It's manifest destiny.
Oh, wow. Beautiful. Hey, Rich, great show. Thanks for being with me today. I really, really appreciate it. And Phil there in Washington, again, doing an incredible job and bringing you Made in America. But unfortunately, we're out of time. But we're going to be back again next week for another adventure of Made in America, where we never stop fighting for your jobs.